Choco Seeker of Paradise is the Chocobo commander, the bank commander from the Final Fantasy set. Cares about landfall and getting buffed, but it also cares about bird tribal as well. Now, I've purposely made this as a bracket 2 list because as a bird tribal list plus landfall, it's a little bit wonky. In fact, I think it's very wonky. I'd love to be proven wrong, but bird tribal tends to care more about flying matters type stuff, and it all synergizes really well. The issue with chocobos, for those of you who aren't into Final Fantasy, most chocobos do not fly, so they're like big ostriches. And that means that as a bird tribal list, it doesn't go well with the flying matters stuff, which greatly depreciates the potency of the bird tribe in this instance. So I've gone for birds whether they are flying or not, but I haven't gone for the flying matters stuff, and that actually gives us an opportunity to play some of the thematic chocobo cards, Final Fantasy cards like Ambrosia and Sars's Chocobo. But anyway, just as a little disclaimer that this isn't an absolutely cracked version of the deck or anything, because I did want to lean into that bird tribal theme. Ideally with this you would really, if you wanted to make the most potent version of it, you'd just go Landfall and turn this into a bit of a Voltron commander. But anyhow, that's not what we've gone for here, so let's go for the typical ramp package which we care about in Landfall. So Farseek, Nature's Claim, Kodama's Reach, Skyshroud Claim, all the typical stuff that you would expect. Scapeshift gets you in the late game a bajillion land drops, all of which will trigger the Choco and other Chocobos that we have to get the +1 buff. We've got Harrow as well for instant speed landfall. We'll get landfall twice from this, which can be a nice combat trick. Argument to be made for Entis Restoration in the list. It's not in the list, but we can easily get our commander above 4 power, and that means that we get 3 lands off the restoration, so we could play that, but decided against it here. Birds of Paradise good in 3 colour plus decks, and plus it's a bird, so allowed myself a mana dork here. As for the creatures that care about lands, Azusa is one of the very few non-bird creatures in the list because it's just so good at getting additional lands into play. Travelling Chocobo is another thematic one and doubles up the landfall triggers, so we effectively get +2 to power every time we play a single land. Exploration allows us into additional lands as well. The more lands we can play, the better, as does Case of the Locked Hothouse. And once this is solved, we'll also be able to play lands, creatures and enchantments off the top of the library, mainly in here for the additional land drops though. So while we're still talking about lands, let's look at the cards that actually care about lands entering. So we've got Sars's Chocobo, a new one from the Final Fantasy set, puts a plus counter on it, so this is going to get very big very quickly. Ambrosia enters with Flash to save the day. Any of you who have played Final Fantasy 16 realise the significance there. And it also has the +1 buff to power, which I'll refer to as Landfall Fire Breathing from now on. Another non-bird creature here, but it will soon make birds as soon as it enters. Preferably we'll play this and then drop a fetch or 2 or 3 into it. The Fat Chocobo is a summon, and it will enter with a 2/2 bird that again has the Landfall Fire Breathing. Eventually gives creatures trample until the end of the turn. Chocobo Racetrack from Final Fantasy 7 gives us landfall. We're going to get a lot of birds with the fire breathing on here, so I think this is going to be an underrated one, but it's going to allow us to get some nice overrun effects here. Giselle Greens makes a Chocobo as well. It has flashback to do it again, so really is in here for the theme because it's not that incredible a card. But allowing myself into bracket 2 lets me play these more thematic cards that are from the new set. We've also got Side Quest, attempting to make a black Chocobo here, so when this enters, create a fire-breathing Chocobo, and at the beginning of the first main phase, if you have 4 or more birds, then we transform it into the black Chocobo. And when this permanent transforms, search your library for any land, put it into play tapped, and it has the fire breathing. So once we've begun ramping and getting all these Chocobos into play, we obviously want to be attacking. So how do we make attacking a bit easier? We've got Reconnaissance, so we can wait and see how our opponents block and then remove the attacking creatures from combat if we want to. That will obviously keep them alive. Dolmen Gate is a similar effect. It prevents all combat damage that will be dealt to our stuff, so we can sort of use attacks as a removal spell. Turn in with our big creatures, force them to chump, and we don't lose anything. Flurry of Wings is another means of making lots of birds. They're not chocobos, but they are 1/1 flyers, and it's noteworthy that you can play this during an opponent's turn if they are attacking in with a throng of creatures. They don't even have to be attacking you. So you could either use these as chump blockers, or you could use them to set up for the next turn. Obviously, the more birds that you use to swing in with the chocobo, the more birds you swing in with, the more cards you're going to see, the more lands you're going to get into play, the more you're going to buff the chocobos, and it's going to really become a big issue for your opponents. Sticking with keeping attacks a bit easier. Like I said before, the chocobos don't often fly, so I do have Avian Oddity more for the commander. Puts a flying counter on it, and we've also got the Mimeomancer. This only triggers at the beginning of the upkeep, but it will give a chocobo base power and toughness of 3/1, and it will give it flying as well. So that just makes it a lot more easy to swing in. Like I said before, the fat chocobo will give trample as well. I'm sort of thinking we should have Garruk's Uprising in here to give trample to everything. The problem being that a lot of our birds aren't all that big. They would need 4 power, and we don't have that many 4 power creatures to trigger the enchantment for the card draw. And so at that point there is a 2 mana green enchantment that just gives everything trample, so might be worth running that instead. But it'll take a playtest or two, I think. So let's have a look at all the birds actually. Mockingbird I think is doing well in Standard. I don't follow Standard at all, but you see the odd headline here and there. This enters as a copy of any creature on the battlefield as long as you can pay the mana value for it, so you could end up with a really big beefy bird copy of something. It does remain a bird as well. SEO gives sort of Ward 3 to your commander. It only counts on spells and not abilities, but it's mainly targeted removal that we're worried about anyway, so this thing should really help. Ledger Shredder gets really big as well, and it's good card filtering with that Connive. Plumecreed Escort can give hexproof until the end of the turn to make it difficult again for spot removal to occur on our commander. Senyu is card filtering also. It's a 2/1 flying vigilance, so it's easy to attack in with, and we can easily have it come back into play as long as we're still attacking with our commander. So yeah, being able to fix your draws reasonably well with this should be handy. Aven Interrupter is one of the means of new white counter spells that they've started to look at in recent years. So it will only postpone the spells, but it will mess up your opponent's turns, especially if you exile an expensive spell with it. It will swallow up their next turn, or maybe they'll never find the time to recast the big spell again. Aven Mind Sensor can mess up the tutors, and you can even use it in response to Kodama's Reaches, Cultivates, Fetches, stuff like that. It does only affect your opponents as well, so it doesn't stop you from fixing your colours. Jackdaw Saviour is good once you've got a few creatures in the bin already. Whenever another creature with flying you control dies, return a creature card with lesser mana value from graveyard to battlefield, so this is one of the only means of flying matters in the deck, but we've got enough birds that have flying that I thought this might be of some relevance. Nimble Obstructionist is really good. I always thought that this should be an ETB as opposed to cycling, but it's part of a cycling set, so we have to make do with the fact that if we're going to counter an ability, then we're going to have to lose out on the body, unfortunately, but maybe that's something for us to reanimate with something like a Jackdaw Saviour. Owlbear Cub just reminds me of Manbear Pig. Whenever it attacks a player with 8 or more lands, we look at the top 8 cards of our library. A creature from amongst them goes into play tapped and attacking, and the rest goes on the bottom in any order. So it might not be all that incredible a card, but I wanted to try it out, especially with us being in bracket 2. It's most likely that we're going to cheat something into play that has flying and isn't going to go down to attacks anyway. Although the Owlbear Cub may well go down to attacks. Travelling Chocobo is the double landfall triggers. Ishai is a great commander in its own right and is going to get massive because it gets a plus counter for each spell that is cast by an opponent. Tashar, again, I'm not entirely sure that we're going to get that much use out of it, but there's a little bit of reanimation on creatures if we play either an artifact, a legendary, or a saga, of which we do have a few in the deck, so difficult to tell until we actually play a game with it, but in the mid to late game we'll be able to get a little bit of value from this. Aerial Extortionist is just a really good card anyway. We can exile a non-land permanent when it enters or attacks, with the downside being that for as long as it is exiled our opponents can still cast it, but when they do we draw a card. The card draw from this triggers on our opponents casting things from the command zone as well, which is noteworthy. Bart's and Boko, I imagine, is going to only be 2 green mana, and when it enters, each other bird you control deals damage equal to its power to a target creature an opponent controls. So we might have some really big creatures in play. Maybe we go for all the landfall buffs on the Chocobos and then swing in, assuming that we're going to keep those after attacks, and then we can play this after the fact and deal the remaining damage with damage markers already on our opponent's blockers. Maybe we can do it beforehand in order to clear the way. So I think this thing is going to be a lot more potent than it initially looks. Castrol the Wind-Crested is probably one of the best bird commanders. You can get all 3 of these, but you have to attack 3 different players, so whenever 1 or more birds you control deals combat damage to a player, you can put a bird from hand or graveyard onto the battlefield with a finality counter on it, put a plus counter on each bird, or draw a card. And speaking of card draw, maybe we should go over that. I don't think we have an obscene amount of card draw. I've really tried to be thematic with this, with it being a weaker deck. So we've got Winged Words, probably 2 mana, draw 2 cards. Airborne Aid draws a card for each bird on the entire battlefield. So it might be that your opponents have 1 or 2 birds to take into consideration with this as well. Rishkar's Expertise, so that we can have a look at the power of our birds and draw cards equal to that. Hunter's Insight, we obviously want to be swinging in and dealing combat damage, so the biggest bird that is getting through can have this pointed at it and draw a bunch of cards with that. Winged Portent is likely just going to be 3 mana for drawing a card for each creature with flying that we control. If we just so happen to end up with a bunch of token Chocobos, then maybe we want to pay the 6 mana for this. I feel like this could have been a much cheaper effect if it wasn't an instant. I don't think it really needs to be an instant, but maybe for the cleave cost. We can do it at the end of an opponent's turn before our turn begins. And then more combat stuff to draw cards with: Coastal Piracy and Reconnaissance Mission. And then we've also got the Kindred Discovery. If we can stick this in a tribal list, it is going to draw us a lot of cards. I always want to point out that this does trigger on tokens. So any Throng of Bird tokens that you decide to get into play, you're going to draw a card for each one of them that enters. And then this also triggers on attacks as well, so it's good to get all your birds in a row, ready to swing in, drop the Kindred Discovery, turn everything sideways, refill your hand, and then just hope that this thing sticks in play for any length of time, because it's really going to be one of the best card draw spells that you can land. As for removal, I think most of it is pretty self-explanatory, so it's Path and Swords, Beast Within, and Generous Gift. Got the Sink into Stupor to try and up the land count. Chocobo Kick is a cool thematic one, so we can bounce a land in order to pay the kicker. Kicker being the optimal word here. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to a target creature an opponent controls. If it was kicked, it deals twice that much damage. So we're trying to get high power creatures running about the field anyway, so if we're dealing double damage, it just means that we can take out even bigger targets. And then other cards of note that we haven't mentioned yet: Raise the Palisade is a tribal mass bounce, so obviously we're going to name bird with this and bounce everything that isn't a bird. Dawn's Truce, we typically go for Heroic Intervention, but this has a bird in the artwork, so just decided to throw this one in instead. There's Perch Protection instead of Teferi's Protection as well. We can gift an extra turn to someone to help an opponent take someone else out, and then we don't necessarily have to worry about the extra turn because we gain 4 bird tokens and all permanents we control phase out. Our life total can't change, and we gain protection from everything until the end of the turn. This is a really awesome card anyway, but the fact that it has birds being created in it just makes it an auto-include, I think. As Incubator I didn't mention during the ramp package previously, but obviously again this is a tribal list, so it's going to make the birds cost 2 less. And then we can play lands from the graveyard in typical Lands Matter fashion, so Crucible of Worlds and Conduit of Worlds are both in the list. And apart from that, I think that's about it. We want to get birds into play, we want to ramp with Landfall, make a good number of birds, and then maximise the amount of damage that we're dealing with Choco. So once again, why don't we go into the playtest function and see how it does. Starting off with some decent cards in hand, but they are quite expensive, and we've got a bounce land there, so that means that we do have a turn 3 cultivate available, so it might actually be worth going for this. I'll try it. We draw for turn, just drop the forest, and then Winged Portent is not online for the 2 mana yet, so I'll play the bounce land. That actually means that we have to discard hand size here, doesn't it? So I think I'll risk just getting rid of the Beast Within. Alright, and there's a Zeuser in order to catch us up on lands, so yeah, I think it might be worth doing that. Or do we just go for Cultivate here? Cultivate's probably fine. So then we go around to turn 4, we've got another means of making additional lands, so let's go. Don't necessarily need to worry about making lands into the commander, so we can just go like that, get exploration down, and the commander means that we can drop a land into it. Do we want to do that necessarily? Because we'd rather buff this next turn. Might even have been worth, I think actually it might be worth getting down to Shah instead, and then we can set up Choco for swinging in with other birds at some point, and this as well means that this will only cost 2 mana. So we'll just pass the turn like that, and there's another bird for us. So let's go for the Winged Words. Gets us another land, so we've got 2 to make this turn, but I think I want to concentrate on getting my commander into play now so that we can start swinging in with it. So let's go like that. Bear in mind this is bracket 2, so it is going to be slow. We can now go Kodama's Reach, get 2 lands into play. I'm not really looking at the colours because I'm not playing properly here, and I can't remember if I just played a land now or not, so I'll just go like that. Triggers our commander, ready to swing in this turn. So if we swing in with both of these, we look at that many cards on top of our library, one of them into hand, and any number of lands into play. So do we take the Obstructionist, or do we take the Case of the Locked Hothouse? I think we can just throw that away and keep hold of the bird, and we can even play that at instant speed. Or we could go for this to give our commander flying so that we can more easily swing in with it next turn, so I think that's what we do there. Again, can't remember if I played a land previously, so maybe we could have this in play, but whatever. Go through to turn 7, and now we're getting into the birds, which is good. We probably by turn 7 have to play a Wrath. I'm trying to play as honestly as I can without actually having an opponent to look at. So let's play the Wrath, and then we've got 3 mana. So are we again either looking at the Nimble Obstructionist or the Chocobo Kick, but we just bounce the board, so probably not too bothered about that. Our commander now has flying thanks to the feather counter on it, so let's swing in with everything. We look at 3 cards, and I think we're holding on to a Dawn's Truce at this point. Didn't manage to make Landfall. Those cards would go on the bottom, but I'm just shuffling them instead because I can't be bothered clicking. So let's say during the next turn cycle we need to play the Dawn's Truce to keep our stuff from being blown up. And there we see a land, so I think we can start to look at probably the Aerial Extortionist. And then we've got lands to play as well. We could go for Kindred Discovery, I suppose. We can't play lands at instant speed with Kindred Discovery, unfortunately, so yeah, maybe we just carry on with setting up the birds. Aerial Extortionist exiles something and clears the way for these birds. So we reveal 3 cards again. And does the land have to come into play tapped? Yes it does, so we might as well make that a fetch. And keep hold of the Hunter's Insight or the Evasion. We're not really struggling too much on card draw here, so I think I'll risk getting rid of the Hunter's Insight there. And then that means that we can play out the Evasion. Maybe an opponent played a commander, so we could go for the Chocobo Kick, and I don't know how much power Choco would have here. We're not getting into the other Chocobos, we're getting into the classic Magic the Gathering birds, but they do all have flying at least. So let's just assume that we get rid of an opponent's commander there, at the risk of not holding up the Nimble Obstructionist. And we could always kick it, and yeah, I suppose we could have kicked that, bounced a land back to hand and played it again straight away so that we can hold this up. So let's just say that we got the body into play. And this is obviously assuming that in a weaker bracket 2 game that we haven't been wrathed. Well, there was at least one attempt at a wrath, but we protected ourselves with the Dawn's Truce. The other wrath was from us, of course. You've drawn into Jackdaw Saviour, so I think now is finally, by turn 9, the time to go for Kindred Discovery. So swing in with 6 birds here means that we draw into 6 cards, and that means that we now have plenty of lands to make into the Azusa, which is probably a good time to play this here. So let's go Azusa and ramp while we've got the chance. So an additional, in fact I don't think we've played a land yet, have we? So an additional 2 lands, or 4 lands in total we can play. So that means we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 mana available. We just played 3 lands. I think we would have a fetch in the bin. I just don't bother fetching them. Yeah, Polluted Delta, so we would have an additional land there. So set up with the Crucible of Worlds so that we can actually play the fetch from the bin. And then that would give us the additional mana, so it's Dolmen Gate, so we're well and truly set up here. The only problem is we can't protect our board, but assuming that we can swing in next turn, we swing in with another 6 birds still, and it doesn't matter who we swing in at because we've got Dolmen Gates, so they can't block us very well. Kindred Discovery draws 6 again, and there we go into the Winged Portent. Assuming that we manage to keep hold of this board the whole time, that would draw us a lot of cards for only 3 mana as the board stands now, and we're finally getting to a point where we can start making chocobos as well. So anyway, you get a rough idea of how we want to do it. Like I said, it's a little bit janky because you're pulling between Bird Tribal and Landfall, which aren't exactly 2 archetypes that go all that well together. But hopefully you do look forward to seeing the gameplay of that in the next couple of weeks. As ever, you can have a look on my mocks field at any of the decks that I decide to make, and if you feel as though there's anything I've missed, then you can let me know ahead of time. Massive thank you to the patrons for their financial support of the channel, and I hope to see you all in the gameplay video for Choco, Seeker of Paradise. I'm tribalkai. Thank you for watching.